FlutterFlow recently released amazing new features and functionality that are going to greatly enhance your apps. And so in today's video, I'm going to be showing you exactly what those features are. And I'm also going to be telling you how you can best enhance your existing or future apps with these new features and functionalities. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I talk about on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone via our Patreon page. And you can learn more about our rapidly growing Patreon community via a link in the description below the video. Now, the first feature that I want to talk about is called a local run. And this amazing feature lets you test drive your app on a fully functioning simulator. Now, before, this used to be fairly complex to do. So you had to be fairly technical to get this working, but right now it's very, very easy, and that way everybody can test their existing apps on a fully functioning simulator. Now, to get started on this functionality, the first thing that you need to do is you need to download the FlutterFlow desktop app. So you can head over to flutterflow.io/desktop, and you can download the right desktop app for your environment. So I already went ahead and downloaded this macOS desktop app here because I'm using a macOS machine. And here I have FlutterFlow for desktop running here with one of my apps here. This desktop app is essentially the same thing that you see via the UI, except now you're running it within its own app. Now, when you have this thing running here, you can head over to this menu here where you typically run your app or you test your app, and you're going to see some new options here. Okay, now I already went ahead and configured this whole local run thing, but when you first started, chances are you're not going to be seeing all this. And so let me walk with you exactly what you need to do to configure it yourself. So if I click here on configure and I go ahead to the first step here, right? In this first step, you're going to be setting up Flutter, which is the underlying framework that powers your apps. Okay, so as you can see, it says here that Flutter SDK is ready to be used, but what you're going to be seeing is you're going to have an option to download it. Now, it's going to take a little bit of time depending on your internet connection, but when you're done, you're going to be seeing a message similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue here. And the next step is going to be to run something called Flutter Doctor, right? And this is a step that's going to check if everything is working as expected. And as you can see here, everything looks good. Everything is working fine. So in this case, you can simply click on continue. And you're going to be on this step here where you can choose the devices. And as you can see, I have 3 devices where I can run my app on. The first is this iPhone 15 Pro Max simulator. I also have a Mac OS, which is this device here. And I have a Chrome browser. Okay. Next, you're going to click on continue. And at this stage, you can actually pick one of these environments here and run your app. Okay. So I can click here. That's going to deselect it. And here I can select them. I can select one of them. I can select a couple of them, or I can select all of them. So that means I can potentially run and test my device on all of these platforms here. So now I can exit out. And so I can head over here and I can click here and I can actually run my app on one of these devices here. Now, when I click here, I see that we have Mac OS and we have Chrome. These are going to be shown by default, right? Assuming that you're running this on a macOS machine like I'm doing. And if you're not seeing the emulator here, right, you need to start it manually. Start the simulator, and I'm gonna start it manually here. And as you can see, I have my simulator running here. And so I'm gonna wait for this to finish. And as you can see, now I have this iPhone 15 Pro Max simulator up and running. The next thing that I wanna do is I wanna click here, and if I still don't see it, I need to refresh my devices. And at which point it's going to go ahead and it's going to fetch the device list, and now it should display the simulator. And as you can see, that is the simulator. And so right now I can simply click here and I can select this device so that my app is going to run on it. Okay, so at this point I have this app, I have this iPhone 15 Pro Max selected here. And so if I click test, we're going to go through a whole series of steps, starting with exporting this project here, It's going to get the Flutter packages. It's going to, do a bunch of other things. And ultimately, the end result should be that my app should be running on the iPhone iOS simulator. Okay, so we're going to wait a couple of moments here. And now, as you can see, this app is running in this iPhone 15 Pro Max simulator. So it's fully functioning. I can click here. I see everything. It works pretty much exactly how it worked when I was developing it inside of FlutterFlow. And this is where you need to make sure that everything works, because if it works here, this is exactly how it's going to run on a real device. Okay, so this is a really, really good way to check, to make sure that everything works as expected, UI issues, functioning issues, etc., etc. Now, there's also a couple of things that you can do at this point. One thing that you can do is you can start a new simulator. Okay, you can see how it works on different devices, right? So if I click on File here, I can do a new simulator, or I can open an existing simulator. So right now I have access to all of these simulators here. So for instance, I can try it out on an iPad Pro 12.9 inches, right? So if I click here, that's going to go ahead and start an additional simulator. Okay, so now I have a new simulator starting up. So I'm going to give it a few moments. Okay, so now it's up and running here. And now what I can do is I can stop this and I can refresh my list of simulators. And that way it's going to detect the new one. Okay, so now if I click here, that should hopefully detect that I have a new simulator up and running, that iPad 12.9 inches. Okay, so there you see this new iPad Pro. So now I can click this, and I can test it out on both of these simulators, just to make sure that it works equally well on the mobile device as well as on the iPad as well. So now it's starting up. It's going through the same, chain of events as was the case previously. So let's wait a couple of moments. All right, so now our app is running on both of these devices. Okay, so on this device, it's a fresh start. So I need to log in. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I can simply click here and I can go ahead and log in. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now I've logged into the app, and as you can see, the layout is slightly different, and that is because it's a different device compared to this phone here, right? We have more real estate, and as a result, the layout is going to be slightly different. I can still click around. I can click here and I can create a new project. All the similar things that I could have done here, except now it's a slightly different layout. It's a slightly different UI experience that you need to take into account. Now, this is a real simulator. You can do a lot of interesting things. You can rotate it. You can change orientation. You can lock. You can Siri. You can authorize Apple Pay, Face ID. There's lots and lots of things that you can do. And obviously these are going to be simulations. This thing does not have an active Apple Pay or a Face ID, but you can simulate those events, right? So if you're building an app that takes into account, being authenticated with Face ID or, Apple Pay, stuff like that, you can simulate all of that, right? As you can see, you can do all of that. And so this is very, very powerful. And this means that if you can get it working on these devices, you're pretty much good to go, right? Because that is exactly how your end users, how your customers and clients are going to be experiencing the apps. And so this is awesome functionality. And just like how I said earlier in the video, this was possible before. I've actually made videos where I showed you guys how to do it, but this was very complex and you had to be fairly technical to get this working. And now it's very, very easy. It's all built in. I can also do a hot reload. I can do a normal reload. I can stop my app. And of course, I can also test out my app on these devices here, on a desktop device, this Mac OS machine, as well as on the Chrome browser if you're building a web app. So definitely put this to use and start using this amazing functionality. The next feature that I want to share with you guys is the ability to connect your app to Gemini AI. And remember, this is Google's AI offering, and this is really, really easy to use. It's actually built into FlutterFlow. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to get your API key. So you can simply head over to ai.google.dev, search around for a Gemini API key. Here I have get an API key. You're going to be on this screen here. This is this Google AI Studio. And as you can see, I have this is one of my keys here. Once you have your key, you can simply search for Gemini, right? And you're going to be in app settings, Gemini. And here you can enter your key. You can first enable Gemini, of course, and then enter your key here. And once you do that, you have complete and seamless integration with Gemini AI. And so let me show you what this means. So here I have a simple app here that gives us access to Gemini AI. So we can ask it questions, we can do image recognition, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and run this app so that you guys can see how this works. Okay, and this works exactly like you would expect. You essentially have direct API integration without needing to do, API calls or anything like that. And so here I have a sample page here where you have an input area, and then you're going to be seeing an answer. So here I can say something like, what are the 3 biggest cities in Mexico? Okay, as an example, and I can press go. That's going to go ahead and connect to Gemini AI. And we have the answers here. Okay, I can do something like this. Is the capital of France? Okay, as an example, hit go. And there you see the answer right here. And if we go back to our app here, this is really, really simple. Okay, so we have this go button. If we open it up, you see this Gemini here. This is an action now. Okay, so this makes it super easy. And the only thing that you need to do is input the text prompt. Okay, just input the text prompt here, and that's it. And it works just like a regular action. You can think of it as a custom action that's built in. You're going to get this output here. And all I'm doing here is updating page state with this output. And this is where, this is the response here, which is a page state variable. And so once we get a response from Gemini AI, we automatically set this and rebuild the page. So easy peasy, but now we don't really need to worry about API calls or anything like that. So really, really nice functionality. The next feature that I want to share with you guys is parallel functions. Okay, so now you can create actions in your action flows that will be executed in parallel. Okay, so before, all the actions were to be executed subsequently or consecutively. Now they're going to be executed in parallel. And this is really, really nice. Let me show you here a quick app example that really works better with this new functionality as opposed to before. Now on this page, we have 2 data tables and we have a load data button. So when I click on this load data button, we're going to execute 2 API calls that are going to run in parallel, right? So they're not going to run consecutively as was the case previously. Now we can have things that run in parallel, okay? So when I click this button, we're executing 2 API calls, we get the data and we're populating them in parallel, right? All of this done in parallel instead of consecutively. And so in this first table, we have a list of countries and their capitals. And in the second table, we have a list of cartoons and the year that the cartoon was released in. And if I try that again, as you can see, it's being populated almost at the same time. There might be a slight couple of millisecond difference, and that is because one API call may have returned data faster than the other one. But it would be a lot slower if it wasn't done in parallel. Okay, so if we head back to our app, let me show you exactly how I accomplish all of this, right? So we have these 2 data tables, and this load data here, it has a parallel action. And so when you click this here, you can add an action or you can have parallel actions, right? So if I click here, I create this kind of flow where I can add multiple actions that are going to be executed in parallel, okay? So let me go ahead and delete that and let me show you what's happening here. So it's actually very, very simple. We have this parallel action flow, and beneath it, we have 2 API calls. So we have this get countries API call and get cartoons API call. And once we get the data, we're updating page state. And we are, feeding this page state, the actual data as the source for this table here. Okay, so if I head over here, as you can see, I have two API calls, get countries and get cartoons. Okay, and we are basically feeding it into a bunch of state variables. Here I have dataset 1, which is the result from the first API call, and dataset 2, which is the result from the second API call. And once we get the data, it automatically rebuilds, and that is kind of why you should be using state, right? App state or page state. As you can see, if we click here, this update page state, we are rebuilding the current page, and we are rebuilding the current page here. So as we're getting the data, we're automatically going to be seeing it, right? And because it's done in parallel, we can, display this data almost equally, right? Instead of like first doing this and then doing this, or, first doing this and then doing this, we can do it in parallel. And so this is a great use case. And other use cases that are going to be perfect for this parallel functionality is anytime you have independent data, right? Anytime you have two independent flows that are not connected to each other, right? So this data here is independent from this data here. And so we don't really need to wait for one action to complete in order to do another one, right? We don't really care what the output is going to be here. It's not really connected to the output here. And so anytime you have independent flows having to do with independent data where one the result of one action is not dependent on the result on the other action, using parallel flows, parallel actions is a great solution. So definitely think of ways where you can put this into use instead of making the user wait when you have consecutive actions being executed one after the other. The next feature that I definitely think you guys should be aware of is the ability to create complex queries when you're pulling your Firebase data. And so if you take a look at this data table here, we're actually feeding it with Firebase data. So this container here is where we're doing the queries. If you click here and we edit this, you now have the ability to combine different filters with an AND condition or an OR condition. Okay, so if you recall, before we didn't have this. So your filters would be automatically AND, right? So you would create a bunch of filters and they would all need to be true. And in many situations, it was a pain, right? It was a pain. Maybe you wanted to have an OR condition, right? Maybe you wanted to have a situation where you don't really care if all the filters are true. You just wanted to see maybe one is true, right? Maybe you wanted to create an OR condition. Well, now you can. And so as an example, here is my Firestore data. I have a people collection. I have 4 records. And I just have a bunch of people with 3 fields, age, country, and name. And so if I click here, I have age 35, country US, name James, age 44, country Mexico, Fernando, 21 Mexico, Nacho, 50 US, Rob, right? And so if I go back to my app, I want to, let's say, get people that are over the age of 30 and the country is US. Okay, so here I have my first filter, age is greater than 30. And country is equal to US, right? And this is going to be an AND filter, right? Because I'm looking for that specific persona. And now if I come back here and I run this app, you're going to be seeing just the people that meet both of these conditions. And as you can see, you are seeing the people that are, over 30 and in the US, okay? And that is exactly what we're looking for, because in this scenario, we want to find just that specific persona. Now, if I go back to my app here, and let's say I edit this, and I do an OR condition, okay? So now I am looking for people that are either, over 30 years old or, from the US. And so now if I go back to this page here, we are seeing more people. We're seeing James, we're now seeing Fernando, and we're seeing Rob. And we are seeing people that are either in the US or over 30 years old. Okay, so that is why you're now seeing Fernando, right? Even though Fernando is not in the US, he is over 30 years old. And that is why you're seeing more people, because with an OR condition, it allows more, more data to come in, right? It's not as inclusive as an and condition. Okay, and this is really, really powerful, because I know, there were many situations where I just couldn't use this filter because it was based on and. Because as you're adding your filters, it automatically ends them together. And now with this new functionality, it allows you to get the exact data that you need. Now, the next feature that I want to share with you guys is the ability to modify requests or responses from API calls. And this is done with something called API interceptors, okay? So if you're doing API calls, if you have some API calls set up, so for instance, I have these two API calls, you now have an ability to modify either the response or the request, or both, okay? And so if you take a look at one of my API calls and I head over to advanced settings, I have this new option called API interceptors, right? And if you hover over, you can see what it says: define or add one or more interceptors to modify the request or response of your API calls. And when it comes to software development, this is called a middleware, right? Essentially, it's a piece of code that sits in between a client and a server. Okay, so a client being this app and a server being, wherever you are making this request to. So this would be a server in this case. A middleware, or this API interceptor, essentially sitting in the middle and either looking at the request or looking at the response, or looking at both and modifying them according to your rules. Now, if you add an interceptor, just like how I did, you're going to be seeing it as a custom action. Okay, so when you head over to custom actions, you're going to be seeing this interceptor. Okay, this is not a custom action. This is something else, except FlutterFlow decided that the best place to display it would be under custom actions. Okay, and so as you can see, if you click here, you're going to be seeing a template here. Okay, so this is this on request and this is on response. Okay, so in this area, you have an option to look at the request and modify it as you see fit. And in this area, you have an option to look at the response and modify it as you see fit. And so what I did here was I went over here to this template, I copied it to the editor, the exact same flow when you're developing custom actions or custom widgets. And I added this header here. Okay, so now whenever we're sending a request, regardless what kind of request it's going to be, if I attach this interceptor to an API call, it's going to take all the requests and it's going to be adding this header called authorization header, and it's going to be adding this value for the header. So this bearer, and here you want to add a token. And so now if we go back to our API calls and, I have this example interceptor attached to this API call, anytime, I'm executing this API call, that interceptor code is going to run. And in this case, it's going to add another header to the request. It's not going to do anything with the response. The response is going to remain unchanged, but the request is going to have a new header in this case. Now, if I head over to this second API call, I go to advanced settings, there's no interceptors here. And so now once I create an interceptor, I have one place when I can add all the code that does something to that request. And so the idea is you create an interceptor that does something special, such as add maybe an authorization token or an API token or something like that. And then you can easily add that interceptor to all of your API calls. And that way, you don't need to head over to headers, add a header here, add a header here. And let's say you have many API calls. You don't need to do that. That's just one use case. It simplifies the bookkeeping, right? It simplifies how you're working with data. And additionally, if you want to do something with the response, you want to reformat it, you want to, change how it looks, modify the data, you have one place where you can do that as well in your interceptor. And so in the future, I'm going to be making additional content to show you some interesting and elegant use cases when it comes to using this API interceptor functionality. Last but not least, I want to share with you guys an amazing functionality that I'm pretty sure you're going to start using right away. And that functionality is called Walkthroughs. So if you head over to your app and you search for Walkthroughs, you're going to be on this page here. And so you can create a new walkthrough. And I actually went ahead and created one. So if you click here, I went ahead and created a new walkthrough. So what exactly is a walkthrough? Well, a walkthrough is something that you may see on some apps when you first load the app for the very first time. And that is a little kind of a wizard, essentially, that walks you through some of the features, some of the functionality that you should familiarize yourself with. So let me go ahead and start this little preview here. This is a very short walkthrough consisting of only 2 steps. But if I click here, you can see that it highlights some part of the UI element and says this feature is important. If I go to the next step, click this button now, and it highlights another, UI element. In this case, this is a button, and I hit, press stop preview, and that is pretty much all. So that is a quick example of a very simple walkthrough, but you can obviously create them as long or as short as you want, right? So you can, display pretty much everything that you want inside of your app, like different UI elements, different pages, different features, functionalities, etc., etc. And the way that you set it up is you essentially create these steps. And when you create a step, you first need to specify what exactly is going to be the UI element that you want your users to, direct their attention to. Okay, so in this case, this first step, we have this input text. And then the second step, we have this button. And you also have other things that you can configure, such as the focus shape, the overlay color, and the skip alignment. And so let's go ahead and create another really quick step to tell the user that this is where they're going to be seeing the responses, the answers from their AI query. Okay, so I'm going to click on add step. And what I need is, well, first I need the widget. So if I click here, I can select the widgets. I'm going to select this container. I'm going to click confirm. Okay, so we have this container. Next, I need to select a component that is going to be displayed, that's going to be telling the user something. So we don't have a component, so we can go, back to the UI. And I already have several components that I'm using for the other steps. So the simplest thing to do would be to duplicate it. And we're going to create another component real quick. That's going to tell the user that this is where the answer is going to be. So I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to change this so that they know. I'm going to say, your response will be here. Okay, and that's all you need to do. Now you can go back to your walkthrough, click here, and because we previously didn't have a component ready, it didn't save that step. So that's no problem. We can simply redo it. Select this component as the focus. Select our new component here. Component alignment is going to be bottom. Focus shape, I'm going to do rectangle. Overlay color, I'm going to leave black as the default. Bottom right, I'm going to do save changes. And another thing that I want to do is I want to reorder. Okay, so I'm going to select this right here. And I'm going to make sure that this is the second one here. I'm going to save changes. Okay, so now we can do our preview. And as you can see, so for instance, here, the first step is highlighting this input field. Okay, I'll just say this feature is important. You can obviously change it to whatever you want. The second step is the one we've just done, right? So the response, your response will be here. And last but not least, we have the button. Click this button now. Okay, you can change it to something like click this button to get started. And that's pretty much it. We've created a simple walkthrough. Now, there's a couple of other things that you should be aware of. This walkthrough can actually tell your app when the user did something, okay? So if you head back to your app here and you click on the top level element, right, this page element here, and you go to your actions, open this up, you're going to be seeing 2 new callbacks here, okay, on walkthrough complete and on walkthrough skip. So you can click here and you can create an action flow that's going to get executed whenever your walkthrough has been completed. And the same thing here on walkthrough skip, you can create a bunch of flows that are going to get executed if the user skipped the walkthrough. Okay, so this is another really nice functionality that I actually was wondering if or when FlutterFlow will introduce this feature for their users. Because as I'm using more and more apps, I've noticed more and more app developers are deciding to actually implement these walkthroughs in their apps. And it does make the whole onboarding process, right, when the users start using their apps, a lot easier and simpler, because the users can discover the important features that are highlighted by the walkthrough, by the initial walkthrough. And so definitely think of some ways of implementing these walkthroughs in your apps. I'm 100% sure that is going to make your users a lot happier and leave them a lot more satisfied, as opposed to having them load the app and having them figure out how to use the app all on their own. I'm pretty sure they're going to be very, very pleased when you offer these walkthroughs. Now, we talked about a bunch of new features that are going to definitely take your apps to the next level. And the best way to leverage these features in your apps, whether this is an app that you're building right now or an app that you are thinking about building in the future, is by practicing, is by experimenting and seeing the best way that you can leverage this new amazing functionality in the apps that you're building right now. And the best way to do it is by being able to access this app that showcases these features that you can implement in your apps. And you will be able to do just that by joining our amazing Patreon community. Because remember, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be getting access to this exact app that I demonstrated in today's video, which means that you'll be able to see this app on your screen, and you'll be able to easily clone this app, which means you'll be able to copy this app onto your FlutterFlow account. But of course, you're not only going to get access to this app, you're going to get access to pretty much all the apps that I have been building and demonstrating and building tutorials around on this channel. So if you've seen that on this channel, chances are you'll be able to view and or clone this exact app on my Patreon page. And that means you'll get access to over 160 apps in all kinds of different niches, simple apps, complex apps, and pretty much all kinds of apps in between. So regardless what kind of app you're planning to build, in what kind of niche, whether you're just a beginner, an intermediate, or somebody with lots and lots of experience, as part of our amazing Patreon app library, there's going to be something for pretty much everyone. Additionally, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're also going to get access to extra content, such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and our Patreon supported masterclass, where I discuss a specific app, a tool, or a concept to our audience. The audience votes for a specific topic to be discussed. I create a comprehensive supporter-only video that talks about that specific topic in great depth. And most of all, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. So if you've gotten any value from any of my videos, then you're going to find even more value inside of our amazing, rapidly growing Patreon community. And so if you're looking to level up your no-code knowledge, our Patreon community is the place that you need to be a part of. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.